Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, is remembered not only for his unparalleled conquests, but also for the terrifying methods he used to maintain absolute loyalty among his followers and instill fear in his enemies. Among his many strategies for consolidating power, one of the most infamous was his brutal punishment of betrayal. In the Mongol world, treachery was considered the gravest offense, and Genghis Khan dealt with it swiftly, publicly, and often mercilessly. This section explores how public executions for betrayal became a central feature of his reign and why they shocked the world. The Mongol Empire was built on a combination of military genius, loyalty, and strict codes of conduct. Genghis Khan understood that in an empire spanning vast distances and diverse cultures, trust was fragile. A single act of betrayal, whether by a soldier, a subordinate commander, or a conquered leader, could jeopardize an entire campaign or undermine the authority of the Khan. To prevent such threats, Genghis Khan established a system where betrayal was met with extreme punishment, often carried out publicly to serve as a stark warning. One of the most notorious practices was the public execution of traitors. These executions were not private affairs. They were deliberately performed in front of large crowds, including both Mongol troops and local populations. The reasoning behind this was psychological. Genghis Khan recognized the power of fear as a tool for control. By demonstrating the consequences of treachery, he ensured that loyalty was reinforced through terror. For the Mongols, witnessing a traitor being executed was a visceral lesson. Loyalty was not optional, and betrayal was the most dangerous path one could take. Historical accounts describe a variety of gruesome methods used to execute traitors. One of the most infamous was death by horse trampling, where the condemned was tied down and trampled under the hooves of Mongol horses. This method was particularly symbolic. Horses were central to Mongol culture and warfare, and the act of being crushed under them represented the absolute destruction of those who defied the Khan. Another method involved beheading or impalement, often performed in the center of a city or military camp. The bodies were sometimes displayed publicly for days, serving as a constant reminder of the fate awaiting any who dared to betray the empire. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of these executions was their targeting of leaders and high-ranking officials. Genghis Khan did not limit his punishments to ordinary soldiers. Even the most powerful generals or nobles who betrayed him were not spared. One notable example occurred during the Mongol campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire in the early 13th century. When some local governors conspired against the Mongols, Genghis Khan personally ensured their capture and execution. Their deaths were carried out with such public spectacle that surviving officials and rulers of neighboring regions were left terrified, learning firsthand that no rank could protect one from the consequences of disloyalty. The impact of these public executions extended beyond immediate punishment. They became a psychological weapon in Genghis Khan's broader strategy of conquest. The mere knowledge that betrayal could result in such gruesome death forced leaders and ordinary people alike to comply with Mongol authority. The Khan understood that conquering vast territories required more than military might. It required a system of fear and respect that would discourage rebellion long after his forces had moved on. This approach effectively minimized resistance and ensured that Mongol rule could be maintained over far-flung regions with a relatively small military footprint. Interestingly, while the punishments were severe, they were also strategically calculated. Genghis Khan did not punish randomly or excessively. He targeted those whose betrayal could undermine the empire's stability. This combination of precision and brutality contributed to his reputation as both a ruthless and intelligent leader. His enemies often referred to him as a figure of awe and terror, a leader whose wrath was both justified and inevitable when trust was broken. By carefully choosing when and whom to punish, Genghis Khan amplified the psychological effect of his actions, making public executions a cornerstone of his authority. The Mongol emphasis on punishing betrayal also reinforced a sense of collective responsibility among troops and local populations. In many cases, entire communities or military units could be held accountable for the actions of a single traitor. This practice created a social pressure to maintain loyalty, as the consequences of one person's treachery could ripple outward, affecting friends, family, and comrades. It was a harsh but effective system of social control, ensuring that loyalty was not just an individual duty, but a communal one. Genghis Khan's approach to punishing betrayal was not unique in history, but the scale and visibility of his methods were unparalleled. Whereas other rulers often dealt with treachery in private or through exile, the Mongol Khan turned punishment into a public spectacle designed to instill fear across the empire. This combination of fear, spectacle, and psychological strategy left a lasting impression on both contemporaries and historians, contributing to the enduring image of Genghis Khan as one of history's most formidable leaders. Furthermore, these executions had a long-term impact on the cultures and regions under Mongol rule. Cities that had witnessed the public deaths of traitors often developed a deep-seated respect or fear of Mongol authority. In some cases, the memory of these punishments influenced political decisions and behavior for generations. Leaders in conquered territories learned to prioritize compliance and allegiance to the Mongols, understanding that even a minor act of betrayal could lead to extreme consequences. In essence, the terror induced by these executions became an extension of Mongol power, reaching far beyond the battlefield. Despite the horror of these punishments, they were part of a broader system of law and order in the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan's code, known as the Yasa, codified rules about loyalty, military conduct, and justice. While the Yasa's precise contents remain partly mysterious, historical accounts suggest that severe punishment for betrayal was a central tenet. By embedding these principles in law, Genghis Khan ensured that his methods were not seen as arbitrary cruelty, but as a legitimate enforcement of societal rules, albeit rules that were terrifyingly strict. In conclusion, Genghis Khan's use of public executions for betrayal illustrates a key aspect of his leadership: the fusion of military strategy, psychological warfare, and social control. By punishing treachery publicly, he instilled fear, reinforced loyalty, and ensured the stability of an empire that stretched across continents. These executions shocked the world, leaving a legacy of terror that transcended generations. The Mongol Empire's reliance on fear as a tool of governance demonstrates that for Genghis Khan, loyalty was sacred, betrayal was intolerable, and the consequences of defiance were absolute. In understanding the terrifying spectacle of these punishments, one gains insight into why Genghis Khan remains one of history's most feared and respected conquerors. Genghis Khan's reputation as one of history's most ruthless conquerors is inseparable from the terrifying methods he used to enforce obedience and punish his enemies. Beyond public executions for betrayal, the Mongol leader employed a range of tortures that went far beyond the battlefield. These tortures were designed not only to punish, but to instill lasting fear, both in those directly subjected to them and in anyone who might contemplate defiance. This section delves into the gruesome methods of torture used by Genghis Khan, exploring how they contributed to the psychological domination of entire regions and left a lasting imprint on history. At the heart of Genghis Khan's use of torture was psychological strategy. Unlike many rulers who punished enemies solely to exact revenge or satisfy cruelty, the Mongol Khan recognized that fear could be a powerful tool for control. Torture was a way of demonstrating the absolute power of the Khan, turning personal suffering into a warning for others. Stories of Mongol tortures spread quickly, often preceding actual campaigns, and many cities surrendered without resistance simply because the terror of Mongol methods was so well known. One of the most infamous instruments of Mongol terror was the breaking wheel, a device designed to inflict prolonged suffering. Victims were tied to a large wooden wheel and systematically beaten or had their limbs broken, leaving them writhing in pain before death. The wheel was not only a method of execution but also a form of public theatre. Entire populations were often forced to witness the agony, ensuring that the lesson of obedience was internalized through shock and horror. The sight of someone being slowly destroyed on the wheel created a chilling association. Defiance against Genghis Khan's rule led to unimaginable suffering. Another method that instilled fear across the empire was the use of boiling liquids or heated metals. Historical accounts describe enemies being immersed in boiling water or having molten metal poured over them. These tortures were excruciatingly painful and often resulted in death, but their significance extended beyond the individual victim. The spectacle of such punishments sent a clear signal that Genghis Khan tolerated no opposition. By witnessing these acts, entire communities were coerced into compliance, effectively transforming fear into a governing tool. Perhaps most terrifying was the precision and creativity with which the Mongols applied torture. Genghis Khan understood that punishment was most effective when it was tailored to the offense. For example, spies or traitors might be subjected to slower, more public tortures to emphasize the consequences of deception. In contrast, opposing military leaders who resisted Mongol armies might face rapid and brutal methods intended to swiftly eliminate potential threats. This calculated use of torture not only punished the guilty, but also reinforced the perception of Genghis Khan as a ruler whose power was absolute, whose judgment was unerring, and whose wrath was unstoppable. The psychological dimension of Mongol tortures cannot be overstated. By creating a culture of fear, Genghis Khan ensured that obedience was often maintained without direct military engagement. For instance, entire cities surrendered preemptively, choosing to comply rather than risk the horrors they had heard about. Torture became a form of strategic leverage, enabling the Mongols to expand their empire rapidly while conserving resources and manpower. The mere reputation of Genghis Khan's tortures worked as an invisible army, spreading terror even before the first arrow was fired. Genghis Khan's approach to torture also reflected his understanding of social dynamics and hierarchy. He did not limit punishments to low-ranking soldiers or commoners. High-ranking officials, nobles, and captured rulers were all subject to the same fear-inducing methods. By treating elites and ordinary people alike, Genghis Khan reinforced the idea that no one was beyond his reach. This approach not only consolidated his authority, but also discouraged dissent among those who might otherwise have thought themselves safe due to status or influence. The universality of Mongol tortures amplified their psychological impact across diverse populations. Historical examples provide chilling insight into the scope of Genghis Khan's tortures. During campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis Khan's armies reportedly inflicted punishments so severe that entire cities were left traumatized. Survivors recounted tales of prolonged agony, burned homes, and the merciless treatment of captured officials. Such stories traveled far and wide, amplifying Mongol influence without further military action. The fear of torture became as effective a weapon as arrows or siege engines, shaping the behavior of enemy states and local populations alike. Moreover, these tortures were often symbolic, designed to communicate a specific message. For example, destroying an enemy commander in front of his troops sent a signal about loyalty and leadership. Publicly mutilating a rebel's family demonstrated that betrayal affected more than the individual. By turning punishment into performance, Genghis Khan harnessed the power of terror in a highly strategic manner. This combination of spectacle and suffering made the Mongols' methods both horrifying and profoundly effective. Interestingly, while the Mongol tortures were brutal, they were not random acts of sadism. Genghis Khan maintained a strict code of law and order within his empire, the Yasa, which governed not only loyalty and military conduct, but also the acceptable boundaries of punishment. Torture was employed systematically and selectively, reserved for those whose actions threatened the stability of the empire. By adhering to a legal framework, Genghis Khan ensured that terror was not chaotic, but disciplined, reinforcing the perception of the Mongol Khan as both ruthless and rational, a leader whose wrath was justified by law and necessity. The legacy of these tortures extended beyond the immediate campaigns. Centuries later, historians and chroniclers noted the profound psychological impact of Genghis Khan's methods. Cities that had witnessed Mongol tortures remained compliant for generations, and neighboring kingdoms often took preemptive measures to avoid confrontation. In this way, torture served as both a short-term tool of punishment and a long-term instrument of control, shaping the political landscape across Asia and Eastern Europe. Finally, it is important to recognize that Genghis Khan's tortures were part of a broader philosophy of power. He combined speed, surprise, and overwhelming force with psychological manipulation to achieve his objectives. Torture was one of many tools in this arsenal, enhancing the Mongols' reputation for invincibility. By integrating physical suffering with fear and spectacle, Genghis Khan created a system in which obedience was ensured not only through loyalty, but also through the profound terror of what disloyalty might bring. In conclusion, the Mongol Empire's reliance on torture under Genghis Khan exemplifies the use of fear as a weapon of conquest and governance. Through methods such as the wheel, boiling liquids, and symbolic executions, he instilled terror that extended far beyond the battlefield. Torture was not merely an expression of cruelty, it was a calculated, strategic, and highly effective instrument for maintaining control over a vast and diverse empire. By turning suffering into spectacle and fear into authority, Genghis Khan demonstrated that the mind could be as powerful a battlefield as the sword. The Wheel of Terror remains one of the most haunting symbols of his reign, a testament to a leader whose legacy was forged as much through psychological dominance as through military conquest. Genghis Khan's military genius was legendary, but equally infamous was his practice of scorched earth justice, a ruthless strategy in which entire cities were destroyed to punish disobedience or resistance. Unlike isolated acts of torture or execution, this method involved mass destruction, often leaving landscapes depopulated and civilizations devastated. It was a terrifying combination of military precision, psychological warfare, and strategic deterrence. Scorched earth justice exemplifies the extreme lengths to which Genghis Khan would go to consolidate power, enforce loyalty, and instill fear across his expanding empire. The origins of this brutal tactic lay in both practicality and strategy. The Mongol Empire, spanning vast and diverse regions, often confronted cities and kingdoms whose rulers resisted submission. Traditional sieges could be time-consuming and costly, straining Mongol resources and delaying campaigns. By employing scorched earth tactics, Genghis Khan could achieve multiple objectives simultaneously: eliminate resistance, prevent future rebellion, and send a chilling message to other cities and territories. In essence, scorched earth justice was a tool of both conquest and governance, demonstrating the consequences of defiance on a grand scale. One of the most well-documented examples of this practice occurred during the Mongol campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire in the early 13th century. When a governor of Otrar arrested and executed Mongol trade envoys, a serious violation of Mongol diplomatic norms, Genghis Khan responded with overwhelming force. The Mongol armies systematically sacked the city, massacred its inhabitants, and razed buildings to the ground. Historical accounts suggest that virtually no one survived the devastation. This act was not merely revenge, it was a calculated display of the catastrophic consequences of disloyalty. Word of Otrar's destruction spread quickly, instilling fear in neighboring cities and discouraging resistance elsewhere. The strategy of punishing entire cities was also grounded in psychological warfare. By targeting urban centers, Genghis Khan effectively terrorized both rulers and civilians. The Mongols understood that the threat of annihilation was often more compelling than the promise of victory in battle, Cities that resisted faced not just military defeat, but potential obliteration. The scale of destruction sent a clear signal: defiance would be met with total eradication. As a result, many cities surrendered preemptively, paying tribute or swearing allegiance to the Mongols without a fight. In this way, the fear of scorched earth justice became a powerful tool for empire building. The destruction of cities often went hand in hand with massacres and population displacement. Mongol armies did not simply burn buildings, they frequently executed large portions of the population, sparing only skilled artisans, craftsmen, or those who could be used to serve the empire. This combination of destruction and selective preservation ensured that the Mongols could maintain control over conquered regions while preventing future rebellions. It also had a lasting impact on the cultural and demographic landscapes of Asia and Eastern Europe, as entire communities were eradicated or displaced, leaving scars that endured for generations. In addition to punishment and deterrence, scorched earth tactics served a strategic military purpose. By destroying cities, crops, and infrastructure, Genghis Khan deprived enemy armies of resources, effectively weakening their ability to resist future Mongol campaigns. This approach minimized prolonged sieges or drawn-out battles, allowing Mongol forces to move swiftly and strike fear into new territories. It demonstrated a level of strategic foresight that went beyond mere brutality. The destruction of a city was both retribution and a calculated step to secure long-term dominance. Historical records provide numerous examples of the devastating effectiveness of this approach. Cities such as Nishapur, Merv, and Herat faced near-total annihilation during Mongol campaigns. In some cases, populations numbered in the hundreds of thousands were killed, and entire regions were depopulated. These acts of scorched earth justice were so extreme that contemporary chroniclers struggled to comprehend them, often describing the Mongol campaigns as apocalyptic in scale. Survivors were left traumatized, and the fear of Mongol retaliation spread far beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing political decisions for decades. It is important to note that while Genghis Khan's scorched earth tactics were ruthless, they were also highly calculated. Unlike indiscriminate violence, the destruction of cities was often targeted at those who resisted Mongol authority. Cities that surrendered peacefully or submitted to Mongol rule were frequently spared, preserving economic and cultural assets that could benefit the empire. This selective approach enhanced the Mongols' reputation for both fairness and terror. On one hand, cities knew that surrender could save them. On the other, defiance guaranteed catastrophe. The combination of mercy and devastation created a psychological balance that reinforced Mongol control. Scorched earth justice also had profound economic implications. By annihilating rebellious cities, Genghis Khan could eliminate economic centers that supported opposition forces. At the same time, he could redirect resources from subdued regions to benefit the Mongol administration. Artisans and craftsmen from conquered cities were often relocated to Mongol centers, contributing skills and knowledge to the empire. This method of controlled devastation allowed Genghis Khan to reshape the economic and social landscape of his territories while simultaneously demonstrating his overwhelming power. Another key aspect of scorched earth justice was its lasting psychological impact. Unlike a battlefield defeat, which might be forgotten or reversed, the destruction of an entire city left an indelible mark on the memory of survivors and neighboring regions. The image of burned streets, destroyed homes, and mass graves was a constant reminder of Mongol might. Leaders in surrounding areas were compelled to think twice before resisting, understanding that the consequences could be catastrophic not only for themselves but for their citizens as well. In this way, the terror of scorched earth tactics extended far beyond the immediate victims, shaping behavior across vast territories. Despite the extreme nature of these actions, Genghis Khan's scorched earth justice was part of a broader system of law and order codified in the Yasa, the Mongol legal code. The Yasa emphasized loyalty, obedience, and military discipline, and the destruction of cities was viewed as a legitimate enforcement of these principles. By framing his actions within a legal and moral framework, Genghis Khan ensured that the terror he unleashed was seen not as arbitrary cruelty, but as a necessary aspect of maintaining the stability and cohesion of the empire. In conclusion, Genghis Khan's use of scorched earth justice represents one of the most extreme examples of punitive warfare in history. By destroying entire cities, massacring populations, and obliterating infrastructure, he instilled fear across empires and secured loyalty from both conquered and neighboring territories. This method combined military strategy, psychological manipulation, and economic control, demonstrating the Mongol Khan's unparalleled ability to wield terror as a tool of governance. Scorched earth justice was not merely a means of revenge, it was a calculated, highly effective strategy that allowed Genghis Khan to build an empire that spanned continents, leaving a legacy of fear and awe that endures to this day. Genghis Khan's conquests were not only remarkable for their speed and military precision, but also for the psychological warfare that accompanied them. While brute force and mass execution struck fear in many, the Mongol leader understood that true dominance required more than physical conquest. He recognized the immense power of humiliation and intimidation as tools to break the will of enemies, coerce loyalty, and maintain control over vast territories. The psychological strikes he employed often left a deeper, longer-lasting impact than the battlefield itself, as fear, shame, and uncertainty became instruments of Mongol rule. One of Genghis Khan's most effective psychological strategies was humiliating enemy leaders publicly. Captured rulers, nobles, and generals were often subjected to acts designed to strip them of dignity, demonstrating that even those in the highest positions were powerless before the Mongols. For example, some accounts describe captured leaders being forced to serve as foot soldiers, carry supplies, or participate in humiliating public rituals. This served as a stark warning to other leaders. Wealth, rank, or influence could not shield anyone from Mongol authority. By eroding respect for traditional power structures, Genghis Khan reshaped social hierarchies in conquered regions, making loyalty to him the ultimate marker of survival and status. Another form of psychological warfare was the public display of defeated enemies. Cities that resisted Mongol conquest often witnessed the parading of captured leaders or soldiers through the streets, sometimes tied to horses or chained in humiliating positions. These displays were not random. They were carefully orchestrated to impress upon the populace the futility of resistance. Observing their rulers or compatriots subjected to shame and terror created an environment where compliance became preferable to rebellion. By leveraging humiliation as a tool of control, Genghis Khan transformed fear into a pervasive social force that extended far beyond the immediate victims. In addition to targeting leaders, the Mongols employed ritualized intimidation of entire populations. Cities that refused to surrender might receive threats in the form of letters or envoys explaining the fate of those who resisted. The Mongols were meticulous in spreading information about previous campaigns, ensuring that stories of destruction, massacres, and humiliation traveled ahead of their armies. These accounts often exaggerated the horrors, creating a psychological advantage even before combat began. By manipulating perception and expectation, Genghis Khan ensured that many cities surrendered without a fight. Understanding that defiance would bring not only death, but shame and suffering on a massive scale, one of the most striking aspects of Genghis Khan's psychological warfare was its integration with military strategy. The Mongol leader understood that fear could be as effective as force in achieving objectives. For instance, he often employed small, elite units to raid and terrorize surrounding areas before the main army arrived. These initial strikes created panic, disrupting morale and weakening the enemy's resolve. When the full Mongol force arrived, cities and armies were already psychologically destabilized, making them easier to defeat. This method OD demonstrated Genghis Khan's understanding that conquest was as much a battle of the mind as it was a battle of weapons. Humiliation tactics also extended to cultural and religious symbols. In many campaigns, the Mongols deliberately desecrated temples, shrines, and symbols of authority. This strategy served multiple purposes. It demoralized the population, undermined spiritual or political leadership, and sent a clear message that Mongol power superseded all other forms of influence. By attacking not just people, but the cultural structures that defined them, Genghis Khan imposed dominance on both a physical and psychological level. Entire communities were forced to reconsider loyalty, not out of devotion, but out of fear and recognition of Mongol supremacy. The Mongol approach to intimidation was both innovative and adaptive. Genghis Khan adjusted tactics based on the perceived strengths and weaknesses of his enemies. For example, some cities were shown extreme violence to instill lasting fear, while others were treated with calculated leniency if their leaders submitted quickly. This adaptability increased the psychological impact, as it demonstrated that the Mongols were not only powerful, but also intelligent and capable of understanding human behavior. Populations learned to fear Mongol judgment, recognizing that it was precise, deliberate, and potentially merciless. An illustrative example of Genghis Khan's psychological tactics occurred during the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire. When the Mongols captured cities, they often executed select nobles and military leaders while sparing artisans and civilians who could contribute to the empire. The executed leaders were displayed publicly, their deaths serving as both punishment and spectacle. This dual approach created a chilling lesson. Resistance resulted in death and humiliation, while submission offered survival and relative comfort. By carefully controlling who suffered and who survived, Genghis Khan leveraged psychological pressure to consolidate power over newly conquered populations. Beyond immediate military campaigns, these intimidation tactics had long-term consequences. Cities that experienced Mongol humiliation often developed a deep-seated fear of revolt, not just during Genghis Khan's reign but for decades afterward. Political decisions were influenced by memories of past atrocities and public shaming, ensuring compliance and reducing the likelihood of rebellion. In this way, Genghis Khan's psychological strikes extended his influence far beyond the battlefield, embedding fear as a permanent feature of Mongol rule. Humiliation and intimidation also fostered a culture of obedience within the Mongol army itself. Soldiers who witnessed the treatment of enemies understood the consequences of disloyalty or failure. This internalization of fear reinforced discipline and loyalty, making the Mongol military one of the most effective fighting forces in history. Psychological tactics were not limited to external enemies, they shaped the behavior of the Mongols themselves, ensuring cohesion, efficiency, and ruthless effectiveness in campaigns across Asia and Europe. It is important to note that while these methods were cruel, they were not arbitrary. Genghis Khan was a master strategist who combined psychological, military, and political tools to maximize efficiency. Humiliation and intimidation were carefully calculated to control populations, protect supply lines, and prevent rebellions. By integrating fear into governance, Genghis Khan minimized the need for prolonged military engagements, as obedience was often secured before a single arrow was fired. This approach highlights his ability to blend brutality with strategic intelligence, creating an empire held together not only by force but also by the invisible power of terror. Finally, the enduring legacy of Genghis Khan's psychological strikes is evident in the historical record. Chroniclers and historians often emphasized the awe and fear inspired by his campaigns. Leaders in neighboring regions would negotiate or surrender preemptively, knowing that Mongol intimidation could be as effective as actual combat. The psychological impact of humiliation, public executions, parades of captives, desecration of cultural symbols remained a key factor in Mongol domination. shaping the political and social dynamics of entire regions for generations. In conclusion, Genghis Khan's use of humiliation and intimidation represents a sophisticated form of psychological warfare that complemented his military conquests. By publicly humiliating leaders, displaying defeated enemies, manipulating fear, and attacking cultural symbols, he broke the will of populations and reinforced obedience. These tactics extended the reach of Mongol power far beyond the battlefield, embedding fear and compliance into the very fabric of society. The psychological strikes employed by Genghis Khan exemplify the interplay between terror and strategy, demonstrating that his empire was built not only on physical force, but also on the mastery of the human mind. The legacy of these methods endures as a testament to the power of intimidation as a weapon of control and conquest. Genghis Khan's name has become synonymous with ruthless conquest, terror, and domination. While his extraordinary military strategies and organizational genius secured an empire stretching across Asia and Europe, it was his punishments, brutal, public, and psychologically shattering, that left an enduring legacy in the art of warfare. Unlike conventional military leaders, Genghis Khan understood that the mind could be as decisive as the sword. His methods transformed not only the Mongol Empire but also the broader approach to warfare, diplomacy, and governance for centuries. This section explores how his legacy of fear reshaped the conduct of war and influenced generations of rulers and armies long after his death. One of the most profound ways Genghis Khan's methods influenced warfare was through the integration of psychological terror into military campaigns. Unlike many traditional armies that relied solely on tactical maneuvers and brute force, the Mongols recognized that fear could preempt resistance. Reports of public executions, tortures, and scorched earth tactics often reached cities and armies before the Mongols arrived. Leaders surrendered without a fight, populations complied under threat of annihilation, and rebellion became a dangerous gamble. This preemptive use of fear changed the rules of engagement. Victory was not only measured by battlefield success, but by the ability to compel obedience before conflict even began. Genghis Khan's approach demonstrated that warfare could extend beyond the battlefield. The psychological impact of punishments created a sphere of influence far greater than the immediate reach of his army. Cities that witnessed or heard of Mongol atrocities altered their political behavior, forming alliances or paying tribute to avoid destruction. Neighboring states adopted defensive strategies or preemptive surrender to evade the fate that had befallen resistant cities. By making fear a central weapon of war, Genghis Khan expanded the concept of combat to include strategy, intimidation, and diplomacy, illustrating that conquest was as much about controlling minds as controlling land. The Mongols' methods also introduced the idea that punishments could serve as deterrents on an unprecedented scale. The public nature of executions, tortures, and destruction served as cautionary tales that reverberated throughout entire regions. By punishing a few decisively, Genghis Khan discouraged many more potential enemies from resisting. For instance, the obliteration of cities like Nishapur and Merv did not merely eliminate opposition at the moment, it created a lasting psychological footprint. Historians note that regions conquered by the Mongols often experienced decades of relative compliance as the memory of terror discouraged rebellion. This shift toward deterrence through fear influenced military thought across Asia and Europe, laying the groundwork for the strategic use of psychological tactics in warfare. Genghis Khan's punishments also redefined the relationship between military leaders and civilian populations. Traditional warfare often separated combatants from civilians, but Mongol campaigns deliberately targeted cities, families, and leaders to maximize psychological impact. Civilians became both witnesses and participants in the Mongols' system of terror. This approach sent a message that resistance was not only futile, but personally and communally costly. By directly affecting non-combatants, the Mongols created a form of warfare that blurred the lines between military and civilian spheres, forcing societies to rethink defense, loyalty, and survival in the face of overwhelming power. Moreover, the legacy of fear influenced the administration and governance of empires beyond the Mongols. Many subsequent rulers studied and adopted elements of Genghis Khan's methods to consolidate power. Leaders realized that terror could be institutionalized as a tool of control. For example, the use of public executions, displays of defeated enemies, and punitive massacres became instruments not only of punishment but also of political stability. Genghis Khan demonstrated that fear could be an effective substitute for permanent military occupation, allowing empires to expand efficiently while maintaining dominance over diverse and distant territories. In addition to strategic implications, the Mongols' use of terror transformed military ethics and strategy. Genghis Khan's campaigns illustrated that decisive brutality could prevent prolonged conflicts. By inflicting overwhelming consequences on resistors, he reduced the need for repeated campaigns against rebellious cities or regions. This approach influenced military thinkers across the world, highlighting the potential efficiency of psychological tactics. Armies and generals began to consider morale, perception, and intimidation as crucial elements of strategy, expanding the conventional understanding of what constituted effective warfare. The legacy of fear was not limited to strategic or ethical dimensions. It also affected the cultural memory of warfare. Stories of Mongol cruelty spread far and wide, becoming part of folklore, literature, and historical chronicles. Cities and kingdoms remembered the destruction of ancestors' homes, the humiliation of leaders, and the agony inflicted upon entire populations. This cultural imprint reinforced the Mongols' reputation as invincible and terrifying, ensuring that their influence persisted even in areas no longer under direct Mongol control. The enduring narrative of Mongol fear shaped diplomatic and military decision-making long after Genghis Khan's death, proving that psychological impact could outlast the physical presence of an army. Interestingly, Genghis Khan's use of terror combined fear with incentives, making it a sophisticated tool of governance. While punishment was extreme, submission was often rewarded. Cities and leaders that complied could retain some autonomy, preserve lives, and benefit economically under Mongol rule. This dual approach, punishing the defiant while rewarding the obedient, maximized the efficiency of his campaigns. Fear became a motivator not only for deterrence but also for allegiance. The legacy of this method influenced how empires would balance coercion with cooperation in managing diverse populations, demonstrating that terror could be strategically coupled with reward to achieve lasting control. Furthermore, the Mongols' legacy demonstrated the universality of psychological tactics across cultures. Genghis Khan's methods transcended cultural, linguistic, and geographical boundaries. Whether in China, Persia, Central Asia, or Eastern Europe, the Mongols applied the same principles of fear, intimidation, and public punishment. This universality made their campaigns remarkably effective and left a blueprint for future empires seeking to project power over vast, heterogeneous territories. The principles of psychological warfare that Genghis Khan employed became a foundational element in the study of military strategy, influencing leaders from Timur to Napoleon centuries later. The long-term consequences of Genghis Khan's legacy of fear can also be seen in modern military doctrine. Concepts such as shock, intimidation, and psychological operations trace their origins, in part, to the Mongols' systematic use of terror. Modern armies continue to recognize the importance of morale, fear, and percept. Ion, in achieving strategic objectives. The Mongols demonstrated that the human mind could be a battlefield as critical as the physical terrain, a lesson that continues to shape military theory today. In conclusion, Genghis Khan's legacy of fear transformed warfare in ways that went far beyond the immediate devastation of his campaigns. Through public executions, torture, scorched earth tactics, humiliation, and intimidation, he demonstrated the immense power of psychological manipulation in securing dominance. His methods redefined the relationship between rulers and subjects, combatants and civilians, and armies and their enemies. By embedding terror into the very fabric of military strategy and governance, Genghis Khan left an indelible mark on the history of warfare, influencing tactics, ethics, and political thinking for centuries. The Mongol leader's genius lay not only in his ability to conquer lands, but in his ability to conquer minds, ensuring that the legacy of fear he cultivated would endure long after the swords were sheathed and the cities rebuilt.